Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week we're going to be once again talking about one of my absolute favorite miniseries with Super Patriot number 3. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in October of 1993, we start off with a phenomenal Dave Johnson cover once again. This looks so good. I really like the detail he put into this. Obviously, he has a ton of influence coming from both manga and anime. There's no secrets about that. But keep in mind, in 1993, this was not something that was just commonly done throughout Western comic books. And this was very much a new type of direction to take comic book artwork in the early 90s versus, today in 2026, as I'm recording this video, where it's pretty common to see this all the time. I also think that Dave did a phenomenal job of really figuring out a way to make Super Patriot terrifying when he needed to be. Obviously the whole dichotomy of Super Patriot at this point in the character's story is the struggle between his human side and the machine side. And when the machine side is in control, it is very obvious that Super Patriot is this just weapon of destruction and death, and that, there is no reasoning with him. He is just an unstoppable force of aggression. And Dave just captures that perfectly. And, it's not an easy thing to do necessarily, given that Patriot's face is covered basically all the time, and his eyes are just lenses. Now, that can lend itself to the idea of displaying a complete lack of humanity, but it also means that he can't really display emotions either when he needs to. So it's a very unique balancing act that he has to play, and I think he just nails it, if I'm being totally honest. Creator, scripter, Eric Larson. Plotter, storyteller, Keith Griffin. Penciler, inker, Dave Johnson. Letters, Chris Eliopoulos. Colorist, Laverne Kidziriski, I think, but that's probably wrong. I apologize for saying that wrong. Color separations, Digital Chameleon. Editor, Janny Wong. Spineless Worm, Josh Ekorn. I don't know what Josh did to get in the bad graces of Eric Larson, but apparently he was in the doghouse at some point or another. The story begins in an outpost that is manned by the Covenant of the Sword, as we see the Covenant soldiers are desperately trying to defend said outpost, as they are clearly outmatched and being cut down in cold blood by a relentless onslaught from a rather surprising foe. Also, again, with the very obvious manga/anime influence, the armors and the weapons that these soldiers use, definitely unique in that aspect, but I think they look fantastic. These soldiers, despite just being cannon fodder, still look super cool and super formidable, despite the fact that they stand no chance against the force they're trying to fight off. We're then treated to a phenomenal 2-page splash and find out that the attacking force is none other than Super Patriot himself. However, this might seem rather confusing, given that in the previous issue we saw Super Patriot captured by the Covenant of the Sword. He was then rebuilt and reprogrammed. In fact, we even see here on the front of his uniform the Covenant's logo. So we have to ask ourselves, why exactly is he attacking the Covenant's outpost and just slaughtering all of its defenses wholesale? And again, God, this looks so good. I love everything about this. The detail in the weapons that Patriot has turned his arms into, the way that all of the soldiers' armor looks, the fact that this guy has a completely nonsensical magazine on his SMG, it doesn't matter. It looks great. I love all of this image and I want more. I really wish Dave Johnson had kept drawing Super Patriot indefinitely. I would have had no complaints about it. Super Patriot is then flanked from behind by 2 men riding hover skiffs with undermounted miniguns, and I'm not saying that these were copied directly from Akira, but I think it's pretty obvious where the inspiration for them came from. Patriot returns fire, killing both of the men, blowing one of their heads clean off. We then see the skiffs explode as they crash in a fireball behind him. Meanwhile, in a nearby room, another member of the Covenant who has already been wounded desperately tries to plead with High Command to end the exercise, as he states the subject has gone redline. However, he is stunned when the person on the other side of the line simply tells him that the exercise will continue as planned and that he is to clear this channel. However, the man then becomes desperate as he states, "You don't understand. I need to talk to somebody higher up. Things are completely out of hand here." But once again, he is simply told that he does not have authorization to use this channel and should clear it immediately. Also, in his panic, he does not realize that Super Patriot is right behind him and approaching slowly, as he is told for a final time to clear the channel, and we just get a slash sound effect with a blood spatter along the wall. We then see Patriot standing over the body of the man he has just slain, as we notice that in the background, the entire facility has been reduced to rubble, as he's destroyed everything and killed everyone within its walls. We're then teleported to another Covenant facility where men are monitoring this operation. One of them states that it only took Patriot 15 minutes to take out a prime outpost, as the man behind the computer screen turns and says, "Well, are you surprised? We have the best tech and the best weaponry." However, this exercise is not over, as we still need to test whether or not the glitch that he experienced before is still persisting. The second man states that if the glitch persists this time and induces trauma, the subject will simply die. We then see that Patriot is ambushed from behind by the same metahuman that defeated him in the previous issue, the giant rock golem man that apparently is known as Rockpile. I don't recall his name ever being uttered within the pages of any of these issues, including this one. However, his name is mentioned in the letter section of this issue, which is where I learned it. So, in case anybody was wondering, Rockpile is apparently the name of this character, for what it's worth. Rockpile immediately begins to taunt Super Patriot, telling him, "I've been authorized to kill you this time, so try to at least make it interesting." However, Patriot has no problem obliging this request when he unleashes a massive laser blast from a cannon that he has turned his arm to, which blows the head of Rockpile clean off. He then rips the body of Rockpile open to expose the small dwarf man that controls him from within. As the man falls to the ground, he turns and remains defiant to Patriot, stating, "Once I reintegrate all of the rock body, I'm going to make you pay." However, Patriot does not allow for this to happen, as he immediately just stomps the man under his boot and kills him instantly. The Covenant scientists then are overjoyed with the fact that everything has been a resounding success, as they state, "Perfect, the man has been suppressed and only the machine remains." One of the men tells the other to inform the council that they are ready for anything, and he says that they'll be very pleased and that he's certain they have definite plans for this new weapon at their disposal. And this is very interesting to show exactly what the mindset of the Covenant High Command actually is, in the sense that they were willing to sacrifice an entire outpost and a metahuman who was already loyal to their cause, simply to see what the capabilities of Super Patriot really were. And they were also willing to kill Super Patriot if that was necessary as well, meaning that they basically have no loyalty whatsoever to anyone within their ranks, and that any sacrifice is deemed necessary if it gets them one step closer to their goals. We are then teleported to the Pentagon, where the bureaucrat known simply as Jack at this point is in a heated argument with Cabot, the leader of Bloodstrike. Cabot is rather angry about the fact that he was not informed of the disappearance/kidnapping of Super Patriot, not because he's in any way concerned for the well-being of Patriot, but because he's worried about the possibility that he's going to be the one that has to deal with him in the future. However, Jack quickly shouts him down, telling him that he will be given information when it's deemed necessary for him to have it, and never before. At this point, Cabot gets very angry, calls him a butthead, storms out of his office, and slams the door. Jack then leans over his desk and sighs as he contemplates what his next move should be. He knows that the situation has gotten completely out of hand now that the sword is in possession of Patriot, and he doesn't know exactly what to do or how to get out of this. He then looks at an old war bond poster of Patriot from World War II and asks, "Where are you, and how am I going to get myself out of this mess with my career intact?" No surprise, a bureaucrat who cares more about their career than the safety and well-being of the citizenry that they're supposed to be protecting and serving. We then are teleported to another part of DC where we see Die Hard flying towards a rooftop where Shaft waits for him alone. Die Hard asks Shaft what the reason for such secrecy is, and Shaft tells him that, things are getting really out of hand. He asks him if he knows about the Patriot situation, and Die Hard exclaims that he does, but there's not much they can do as nothing's been authorized. Shaft then tells him, yeah, but here's the problem. The bureaucrats at the Pentagon are really just more concerned about covering their butts at this point, and they're really downplaying the seriousness of this situation, and that the Covenant of the Sword has actually caught everyone completely off guard and by surprise. Die Hard asks him what he's getting at, and Shaft makes a very grave statement telling Die Hard, Patriot's a weapon, and if you have a weapon, what do you do with it? As we see Die Hard look back and suddenly realize what it is that Shaft is getting at. Meanwhile, back at the Covenant High Command, we see the woman who was acting as a mole in the Pentagon for the Covenant of the Sword giving her report to the High Command member. She tells him that the unit, aka Super Patriot, is away on his mission and that they have total control of him. The High Command member is very happy to hear this and tells her that he's also very appreciative of the poetic justice of her scheme. She then says, yes, his body was rebuilt by Cyberdata after it was destroyed by the Vicious Circle. He was then rescued from Cyberdata by Die Hard, who brought him back to the government, who then reprogrammed him and sent him after the Covenant of the Sword, and now it's the Covenant's turn to give them a taste of their own medicine. The High Command member states then that he's also happy that this will send a loud message to the rest of the world that nobody pries into Covenant business. We are then transported to this large sci-fi airship that is using some form of unknown technology to maintain flight, even though there's no way that this should ever be possible. One of the pilots states that they can't believe they're doing this in broad daylight. However, his co-pilot tells him not to worry, as the cloaking device will hold out long enough for them to deliver their package and get out of there. The other pilot then tells him, well, the sooner the better, because this one gives me the creeps. However, his co-pilot tells him that he's just being a wimp and to prepare as they are entering their final vector of approach. We also notice that Super Patriot remains motionless and emotionless during this entire transportation, not paying any attention to anything that the two pilots are saying, and just blankly giving a 1,000-yard stare to the opposite wall of the vessel. The Covenant High Command then gives the order, and we see Super Patriot jettisoned from the airship. He careens toward his intended target, which of course is in fact the Pentagon, as the woman states it's party time. We then see a minigun open fire on a line of parked cars, and also learn that this minigun is attached to a super souped up hot rod version of the air skiffs that we saw earlier in the issue, though admittedly this one looks way more badass. Look how awesome this thing is, with just the huge ammo pack on the back with the ammo belts feeding into the chain gun on the front. This is just a super cool shot, and even though it's just a fancier version of something we already saw in this issue, I don't hate it. I gotta be honest, I really like this thing a lot. Patriot then leaps off of the skiff and lands safely on the road in front of the Pentagon as the skiff itself collides into the front doors of the Pentagon, causing a huge explosion. This, of course, is heard in the office of Jack as he screams out and runs to the door to see what was happening. He's informed by one of his subordinates that they're under attack by that Patriot weapon thing of his. He's shocked to hear this as we see that Patriot is slowly making his way through the Pentagon, Terminator style, laying waste to everyone in his path. As Patriot rounds the corner, he encounters a group of military police who do their best to stop him. However, their weapons have no effect, and he immediately mows them down. The Covenant is monitoring the situation through Patriot's own eyes, as they state he is 1,500 yards from his intended target and that all systems are functioning at maximum. We then see a group of heavily armored U.S. troops who are doing their best to try and formulate a plan. One of them asks what the situation is. The other one says not good. And whatever the Covenant did to Patriot, they did it real good. At this point, Jack has decided that all bets are off as he tells them that he's authorizing lethal force and that they are to take down Super Patriot. The commanding officer says that no, we can't. However, Jack tells them that he'll accept full responsibility in this case. As Patriot begins to approach down the hallway, all of the men realize that this is their last stand, as they all take aim and the commander says, fire at will. However, despite the large and impressive weaponry they're wielding, it has little to no effect on Patriot, as it doesn't even seem to be slowing him down. He immediately transforms his arms into weapons of his own and unleashes his own barrage in return. Unfortunately, the soldier's armor does nothing to protect them from Super Patriot's attack, as he just continues to fire relentlessly upon them. We then see a close-up of his face where the flames reflected in his lenses are drawn metaphorically as a representation of a human skull. We then see that Jack was injured in the barrage, but is still alive, and the woman who is monitoring from the Covenant High Command, who was acting as a mole for the Covenant of the Sword in the Pentagon, simply laughs and states, "You've had that coming for a long time, Jack." However, at this point, Super Patriot does something very odd. Instead of finishing off Jack, he instead transforms his arm into a powerful laser cannon, takes aim at the floor, and blasts a hole with one shot through multiple stories of the building as it penetrates all the way down to the sub-basement we saw him being operated on in the very first issue. Patriot then jumps through the hole, landing safely all the way down in the sub-basement, where he is greeted by another large group of heavily armored and armed soldiers. The commanding officer states, "We've got him now, take aim and fire." However, a loud voice screams no from behind. Patriot turns and is greeted by the sight of Die Hard, who busts through a wall of the sub-basement and simply screams out, "He's mine," as we reach the end of this issue. We then get to the letter section of the Super Patriot miniseries known as Stars and Gripes, and there's quite a few, as Eric decided to include 4 full pages of letters, but some of them were pretty interesting. One reader actually seemed to think, well, not just one, actually several readers seemed to think that Patriot died when he was attacked by the Vicious Circle. And Eric has to explain to several different readers that Patriot was not killed in that interaction, he was just severely maimed and crippled. And I kind of found it surprising that so many people thought this, as it seems pretty obvious that he survived the ordeal, especially if you remember the news report about him that we saw in the pages of Savage Dragon. There were a few other interesting letters of note, one of them being someone who brought up the question of why so many of the image creators were constantly doing mini-series for new ideas instead of just making ongoing series. And Eric explains that the thought process behind it was that if it wasn't successful, they could just, not continue it into an ongoing series instead of saying, hey, here's this new series and canceling it after 4 issues. That it was a really good way of deciding whether or not something had enough of a fanfare and meat on the bone to continue doing it, which in my opinion is a really sound business strategy, but it was also something that people hadn't really seen done enough to be familiar with, so they weren't used to the concept that the guys at Image were introducing at this point, even though it does really make a lot of sense from a business perspective. And the other thing I found really interesting was the large percentage of readers who kept comparing Super Patriot to Deathlock from Marvel. I understand the idea that they're both like cyborgs and they're both, using advanced weaponry and whatnot. But after that, there's really no similarities between the characters. I mean, Super Patriot's abilities are far different from those of Deathlock, so it seems weird to me that the two of them would be compared to each other the way they are, especially when they really don't look like each other. I just thought it was kind of an odd comparison for people to make, but apparently there were a lot of people who really thought that Super Patriot was heavily based and influenced by, Deathlock from Marvel, which personally, I just don't see it. We then get an advertisement for Freak Force #1. I, of course, have all the issues of Freak Force and will begin making episodes on Freak Force when we reach the point in the Savage Dragon story where Freak Force splits off into its own monthly series. And we then get an advertisement for Super Patriot issue #4, where he squares off once again against Die Hard. I, of course, have this issue and fully intend on making an episode about it in the not-too-distant future. We then get an advertisement for Troll. I am currently in the process of making sure that I have everything I need to begin making episodes on Troll, and when I am positive I have all that I need, I will begin making those episodes, so stay tuned. We then get an advertisement for Codename Strikeforce. If you'd like to know more about Codename Strikeforce, you can check out my Codename Strikeforce playlist. On the final page of the book, we get an ad for Shadowhawk 3, the third Shadowhawk miniseries. Now, as I'm recording this, I have only made episodes on the first Shadowhawk miniseries, but will be making episodes on the second and third miniseries as well, so stay tuned for that. And if you'd like to know more about Shadowhawk, you can check out my Shadowhawk playlist. And on the reverse inside cover, we get an advertisement for Savage Dragon #6, The Exit of Freak Force. Now, as I'm recording this, I have only made it through issue #3 of the Savage Dragon ongoing series. However, next week, I will be putting up an episode on issue #4. Stay tuned for that. And if you'd like to know more about Savage Dragon, you can find out everything from the initial miniseries to where I'm at now in my Savage Dragon playlist. And that was Super Patriot #3. And what can I say? I absolutely loved this issue as I loved the first and second issue of this miniseries. I have not at any point tried to hide the fact that Super Patriot is 100% one of my absolute favorite comic book characters. And I think that this miniseries, including this issue that we looked at today, is phenomenal. The artwork, the storytelling, the pacing, the action, win. I love everything about it. I have pretty much no complaints that come to mind. I just wanted to see more. If there was a complaint for me to lay down, it's the idea that this did not turn into an ongoing series and that we were deprived of even more Super Patriot, because in my opinion, there's never enough Super Patriot, but your opinion may differ. You may not like Super Patriot. You might think he's a terrible character. You may think the artwork and the storytelling in this miniseries is bad, and you might think that the pacing is off and that the action is overblown and you don't like anything about him. And to you, I say, some people are just wrong about things because Super Patriot's the best, man. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.